Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 63. I'm Enigmius, and today, continuing with the Chariot carrier build, I mentioned in the last episode that I wasn't going to make you watch this whole process block for block, and I changed my mind. Not because I think that it would be particularly entertaining to watch this kind of thing for the next 15 minutes, but because I had one of those occasional moments where I think of something that I maybe should have thought of from the very beginning, but I didn't. And it actually changed the entire process of sort of filling in this area. We're working on the back section of the ship, and we've got a number of different angles and curves and contours and things that are intersecting and working, next to one another. And the end result is to have them all come alongside the portion of the ship that we cut and paste from the front end, rescaled and attached to the back end, and we need to make it all come together so that it all fits and it all looks reasonable, I guess would be a fair word to describe it. Part of the challenge from the last episode was the number of curves and angles and things that were coming together, and it wasn't necessarily straightforward in terms of trying to decide exactly what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. We did, in the last episode, reach the point where we could sort of move forward with a plan. We had a plan and it was time to work on it, but the sheer number of blocks that we would have to place was a little bit daunting, just because of the amount of distance that we had to cover. But then I realized in the back of my mind, we've got these profiles basically working in columns, as you see here, that are essentially the same thing that is duplicated for a certain distance, and then we change the angle, so we have to change the pattern, and then we duplicate it for a certain distance. And that's exactly what we're doing here, is we're basically setting up the profile that we need to cover a certain distance, and then we cut and paste it. Instead of placing each individual block, we just do it all at once and save ourselves a profound amount of time in the process. And then when we get to an area where it changes angle, the profile shifts a little bit, then we place the blocks that we need to place in order to account for that shift, and then we cut and paste those, and we essentially work our way down that way, which the amount of time saving was just ridiculous. And then I realized at this point that it's probably something that I could show you guys, and especially given that we're doing it a little bit better than if we were just placing each block individually. And the key here that I found, I was talking a couple of episodes ago about how I discovered the reasoning behind why you occasionally find yourself with blocks that are out of alignment by an amount that doesn't make any sense. The game doesn't allow you to work with increments that small, but yet you'll find blocks that are out of alignment as a result of it. And what it's from is using the match feature to place the blocks. And if you don't have the cursor specifically on the face that you're matching in the right location, it slides around a little bit. It just slips and it slides, and it kind of goes a little bit out of alignment. And if you click the mouse button to make it go when you're not directly on the face, clearly on the face, it kind of goes a little bit wonky. And that wound up happening here at some point. And I noticed as I was working my way through that there were just hairline cracks, straight line cracks that are, appearing from time to time. And I kind of had to make the decision, do I want to tear it all apart and redo it in order to address this little hairline crack? Or do I want to just live with it and just say, to hell with it, I'm not going to get that involved. It would be nice if it was perfect, but the amount of time and effort that would be required to pull it all apart and make it perfect, it didn't justify it. The ends didn't justify the means in this case, but we're kind of making a lot of great use out of this cut and paste feature that the game comes with, that it's one of those things where if you use something regularly, you'll continue to use it regularly. If you don't use something very often at all, you will tend to not use it very often ever. It's a learned kind of thing. You have to kind of adapt the way you think to acknowledge that this is an option in order for it to be considered as an option in any given circumstance where it might fit. And all of the things that I've done with the cut and the paste, it's just not frequent enough in order for me to have it registered as a persistent option anytime I'm doing this kind of duplication like this. And it's a habit that I would like to get into, but if I'm not going to be able to get into that specific habit, at least I was able to make use of it here and also demonstrate the benefits of being able to do this, because as you can see, there's all kinds of different profiles that we're working our way through, and they're all just duplication of one another. You do one for a certain distance and then you change, and the concept remains the same. It's just the size of the blocks changes. So we were able to get that downward portion knocked out much faster than I anticipated. I was basically planning on doing like maybe 2 or 3 minutes showing you where we started from, which is basically where we left off from the last episode, just to get everyone sort of back into it, and then skip a bunch and then show you when it was nearly done and let you see the last little bits that go into finishing it off. But in this case, I thought it was well worth it to kind of highlight the benefit of using the cut and paste for this sort of thing. And then we got to this part on the underside where, again, the goal is to have this cut flush with that piece that we've got sticking out from the sides. That's kind of the way that I would like it to be lined up. Now, one of the things that wound up being kind of a pain is that the interior side of this piece that we cut and paste into place actually extends into the hull of the ship ever so slightly. And I tried to make it so that when we were placing the blocks and they were going flat, that they were going flat with that portion that's basically, you know, sticking in, so we didn't have any overlap at all between the two profiles where they intersect. But it didn't seem to want to work that way, and it didn't matter what I tried in order to make it work. It ended up being that the best way to make it look the way that I wanted it to, at least up to this point, was to have that little bit of an overlap between the blocks, and if necessary at some point down the line, do the thing with the hologram blocks where you can place the hologram blocks and then place blocks that overlap with them more than you would normally be allowed, and then you switch the hologram blocks to the solid blocks, and then everything lines up. That's sort of I still consider it kind of a worst case scenario approach, and what I'm finding recently is that it works, but it doesn't seem to work in all of the circumstances where I would have expected it to. It's just very strange, but sometimes that's the only thing that we can do in order to make things work the way that we want them to. What I'm focusing on here is I'm just trying to use what I've got with the blocks that are available in this space that we're trying to kind of transition between the stuck-on piece on the side and the hull that we just finished getting up to this point. Is we've got these slope blocks that I'm trying to place because that seems to be like a pretty good transition. That gets us from the outer hull that we just placed, transitioning to the underside of this piece that we just stuck on. But now we try and get into this little section right here where it starts, the piece that's stuck on starts to slope upwards. That's where it goes to hell, because that's where the transition just doesn't seem to want to work, and it doesn't really matter what I try to do. Either the blocks don't line up the way I would like them to, or they overlap in ways that don't really work without the hologram trick. And I wasn't really at the point just yet where I was willing to just, you know, kind of invoke the holograms in order to get things done. So there's a certain amount of fiddling around, and there's a certain amount of trial and error, and just experimenting and seeing what we can make happen with the different shapes and the different combinations of things, and trying to get a transition that I'm happy with without compromising too much at this point. Like I was talking about previously, sometimes you have to compromise in order to get things to work, and it's just the nature of the beast. Maybe at a later date you'll come up with the solution, but you try everything that you can think of while you can think of it, And then if nothing works, that's when it makes sense to start to look at certain compromises and making certain decisions. It maybe wasn't your first choice of what you would have liked to do, but an acceptable alternative might be something. And that's the whole nature of the compromise. There's never really a point where I'm willing to settle for something that looks like absolute garbage, in my opinion, and say, well, that's the compromise that we had to do. I would rather redo an entire section of a ship than be left with something that just really kind of bothers me the way that it's laid out, and say, well, I couldn't do any better. That's not really kind of the approach for me anyways. If I'm not successful in doing it the first time, it means that there's some learning to be done, and I don't learn if I try and bypass that process by compromising and settling for something that I'm not happy with just for the sake of saying that it's done. And I think that's a really, really difficult thing to learn. I think anyone can learn it, but it takes some time and it takes some patience and it takes a little bit of dedication to say I'm not going to give myself the easy out until I'm completely out of options. And when it comes to something like this, where you can literally tear apart a ship and start over either the entire ship or a segment of that ship until you get it to what you're happy with, then there's really never a point where you were out of options and you had to settle for something that you really didn't like. So it's kind of the way it works out. You can see here we've been trying all kinds of different shapes, trying to force ththings to fit together that didn't necessarily want to fit together, and we end up with either things that don't align in ways that I really am not happy with. You can see sometimes it's too busy. When we've got something like this, a particular shape like this, where it's going to be out of the way, it's tucked up underneath, we don't necessarily have to be pixel perfect in getting everything to line up the way that we want it to. It's still kind of difficult at times to get things. Usually we're just flipping around all kinds of different blocks, all kinds of different shapes. What ends up happening is we'll end up with, particularly when we're doing compound curves like this particular area here, we'll end up with a bunch of weird sort of ledges. And it's the opposite of having something that's seamless. You know, sometimes we have a little bit of a seam here and there, and we can live with it. We can do things to conceal it a little bit better, or we can just kind of accept that it's there and it's not that big of a deal. That's one option. But then we get to situations where it's just a mess, like an absolute mess of seams, blocks don't line up the way they want to, angles going in all the wrong directions. And that's when it's kind of this situation where it becomes more and more attractive to just pull the whole damn thing apart and start over. Fortunately, in this case, you can see I'm just sort of filling in. We got most of the profile done, and we just had a little bit of a gap between the external bit that we stuck on and everything else. So taking a break from this mess underneath to fill those in sometimes is just a really good way to go about it, because it gives you an opportunity to focus on something else. And then when you come back with a fresh set of eyes, and you can come up with probably, you know, at least one or two more alternatives before things start to go to hell again. And in this case, you can see we've got this sort of fillet. It's like a little upside down ledge, I guess maybe would be a way of describing it, that we're creating on the underside that follows the contour of that exterior piece that we stuck on. And by placing it where it is and being careful to follow that contour, it gives us a little bit of breathing room in terms of the things that we might want to intersect with this. You can see now we don't have to worry so much about having everything come together seamlessly, because we've created a deliberate seam. It looks deliberate. It looks like it was done on purpose because it follows the contour. And now we just have to come up with something that allows this particular transition, this specific area that we're working in right now, to come together in a way that we can live with, and then we're good. But you see the holograms, there we go with the holograms, doing the little swap and trying to make things fit as best we can. Ultimately, I was pretty happy with the way it worked out. I was most happy with how quickly I was able to get it done because of the cut and paste. So the next episode, we're going to continue on. We've got some more work to be done on this part of the hull where it intersects with the external bit, but now that we've got the process, it'll go fairly quickly. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes of this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.